Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Walker, and I'm the CEO of Picture Motion, a social impact company that is hosting today's special virtual event. At Picture Motion, we work with the world's leading storytellers to drive awareness, engagement, and tangible action, connecting audience members and key stakeholders to impactful stories. We are so glad today to be joined by Atomic Hope's very own film director, Frankie Fenton. Frankie Fenton is an award winning director and producer specializing in documentaries on social issues. He holds a master's in film from Dublin City University and guest lectures at the National Film School in DKIT film production. His debut feature documentary, It's Not Yet Dark, narrated by Colin Farrell, premiered at Sundance and was screened in over 50 countries. He produced The Grass Ceiling, a film on gender equality in sports, and Atomic Hope, a feature film he directed on the nuclear debate and climate change, all receiving international award-winning critical acclaim. His films have been distributed in theaters across the US, UK, and Ireland, and through online streaming giants Netflix, Apple TV, Paramount, and Amazon Prime. Now we'll jump into our fireside chat with Atomic Hope director Frankie Fenton. So thank you, Frankie, for joining us today. Really a pleasure and really exciting to just be working with you on this campaign. I would love to just jump in and obviously share your story around the film and maybe a little bit about your background as well. First, what initially sparked your interest in the topic of nuclear energy and what motivated you to direct Atomic Hope?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Brian. I think as a naive wannabe filmmaker, I wanted to make a film about something big and important and something that would have a positive change in the world. And so I'd looked into kind of many different topics. One was food and the other was pharmaceutical companies. And I got handed this article in Wired magazine about this thing called thorium energy that happened to be kind of a type of energy that many people hadn't heard about, and it just had this crazy cool rock and roll story behind it. This magical form of nuclear power that seemed to answer a lot of the problems that we have in the world today, and a lot of the problems that we have with nuclear power, like the safety issues or proliferation and cost. And I just thought that if a lot of people knew about this type of energy, that perhaps this could be a kind of a silver bullet. And so I started interviewing people regarding this different type of nuclear power, and it was kind of like the in drug. I kind of just got hooked. Initially, the kind of through this Atomic Diaries kind of project that I'm doing now of all of that footage that kind of got left on the cutting room floor. I'm going back now on all of those initial interviews that I did. And recently I've just discovered just how, difficult this subject matter was to penetrate in terms of just the layman approach. Those initial interviews, I had no idea what anyone was really talking about. The physicists are not kind of trained, science communicators. And so I thought in my very naive head, if I was able to kind of decipher what it was that they were saying in a way that was palatable and entertaining, that perhaps the subject matter might be kind of easy to penetrate on a societal basis, And so that was the kind of the drive and the want to make something that would be able to bring this subject matter to kind of to a bigger audience, and also to kind of take a different approach and kind of see it from a point of view that we might not be used to.
And I know in one of our early conversations you mentioned that you started this project almost 10 years ago. I believe so. How do you feel like your personal views on nuclear energy have evolved throughout this process and kind of this learning and journey?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, Brian, like it's kind of more to do with the more I kind of learned about the subject matter, the more I was like, this can't be real, right? So like I was coming from a very anti-nuclear background. My father had gotten cancer. I was told by a teacher in my school that was probably because of the Sellafield nuclear power plant that's across the Irish Sea here in the UK. And Ireland has been notoriously anti-nuclear kind of throughout its entire environmental history. And so yeah, I suppose I kind of started off being really terrified about nuclear power and everything, and to hear somebody speaking about it positively was really unique to me and kind of odd and strange. And kind of then what I started to realize was that a lot of the kind of claims that we had about nuclear power were being adamantly refuted by kind of scientists and engineers, but it wasn't really communicated in a way that was kind of easy to understand, or kind of, you know, I suppose one of the biggest examples I suppose I have is a vehemently anti-nuclear protester who had told me that over 1 million people had died after Chernobyl. And then when I really went looking into that and kind of to find out the, you know, what the World Health Organization said, what UNSCR reports were, what the people behind the Chernobyl tissue bank were saying, the people who were being on the ground there for 30 years, who'd been really trying to work out the impact of radiation on the populace of Chernobyl. And the numbers were like infinitely smaller. There were like 140 people, you know, there were worlds apart. So that kind of got me thinking, then there must be something up. Somebody's lying here. Like, what's going on? Because I'm not a scientist. I don't know. So it really became apparent then, once I started scratching the surface, I realized that when most people are at home reading their paper and going to work, that they don't really have the time to kind of look into this kind of stuff. So I think today, now we have this conversation about nuclear power as if it's been going on for 20 or 30 years. But really, we've only had access to these kinds of voices, to these explanations and kind of thoughts around nuclear power really in the last 4 or 5 years, since, you know, since this whole new movement of nuclear advocates and activists have come about.
No, I mean, that really sparks the next question.
Yeah.
You know, the film showcases such a variety of perspectives from around the world. How did you approach the task of presenting these diverse viewpoints on nuclear energy? And what was your process for ensuring that the narrative kind of remained balanced and informative?
Yeah, balance is an interesting one, just because, like I say, coming from a very anti-nuclear place, we only really heard that one story, which was that nuclear equals bad. Have you not watched The Simpsons? It's awful, and it also kind of mired in with like this whole capitalist thing and this kind of, you know, the evil bad guy kind of world. And it had a real kind of worldview on it that just kind of painted that whole good guys versus bad guys thing. And then, you know, realizing that there were not only kind of people who were kind of talking about it who weren't part of the nuclear industry, but were coming at this from an environmental point of view. Well, that really got me thinking. It was like, okay, so these guys are liking this because of, well, there's the carbon, but the waste and the, you know, the cost and the, you know, they had thought out this argument and found out that all the reasons why nuclear power was something that was not only really important but essential. So yeah, there was very few people saying it, and so that kind of made it easy in terms of finding people, this very small community, which, you know, was just blossoming. So there was quite a few in North America, but then there might be one or two in Australia, and another guy in Japan, and you know, a biologist in Finland. And it wasn't really kind of trying to, you know, like find people from all over the world who were saying this. It was literally the people who were saying this around the world. They just happen to be living in different countries. And today, that has changed quite a lot. But I realized that telling this story kind of from a fresh point of view would just by the merit of pointing the camera at these guys saying the things that they're saying, would objectively already have this other balanced point of view, because we already know the reasons why most people don't like nuclear power, or the people who don't like nuclear power, we know the reasons why they don't. And that's usually because of, you know, the waste, the cost, the all of the tropes that kind of come along with what we've learned through the media over the past 30 years or 40 years even. So making something kind of balanced was an interesting one as well, because it was something that I knew we already had an answer for. And by merit of putting in this kind of argument within a kind of creative documentary, I ended up, it would have been something completely different. It wouldn't have been, it would be a television doc, something for broadcast perhaps, and that. Whereas this is really about the journey of people from around the world who care about the world that they live in, and they have an alternative view to how to solve some of the bigger problems that we have in the world. And to my mind, I hadn't seen those types of voices or heard those types of voices and seen those kinds of people being humanized. And that's really what all I try to do, is just to kind of go, okay, these are people. They have kids, and we're eating breakfast with them, and we're seeing people in a different way, because the whole green movement had been built around this idea that solar and renewables is something that's wholesome, and everything else is kind of not that. And so that was really the interesting part for me, was meeting these people who were coming at it from this wholesome point of view, but just with a completely different worldview in terms of our energy solutions.
I totally I see that, and have kind of seen even my own personal journey and enlightenment around watching the film, and really understanding how people are responding to the film as well. Just kind of speaking to that, what has been the most surprising or enlightening feedback you've received from audiences who have seen Atomic Hope? We can jump in. How do you hope that people will be impacted by the film, particularly in the nuclear energy debate going forward?
Look, I really, it's about creating conversation. I'm a filmmaker from Ireland. What the hell do I know? I just want to throw some mud at the wall and see what sticks, and see what people kind of pick up what I put down effectively. I think it's kind of probably why the subject matter itself is so hard to penetrate in terms of from a filmmaking point of view. I heard a kind of a quote from Oliver Stone, who said that he had made a film that very, very like this, and making kind of, instead, his film is kind of more making a film or an argument for nuclear power, which is slightly different to what I've done. But what he said was that this is the hardest film that he's ever made. And it's because it's a hard one to talk about in an entertaining kind of way. And it's kind of informational, but yet so controversial to a lot of different people. But in truth, I was expecting so much more pushback on what it is, like, especially in Ireland. And what I got was almost nil. I found that actually what's happened is that people have become quietly educated online just by merit of just being online and kind of reading different things. A lot of the journalists and a lot of kind of journalism and communicators around the world and scientists themselves have also educated themselves regarding the topic. And it's become less of a stinger of a controversial topic, which is great. And if my film kind of adds, it's just one little drop in the ocean to kind of help that enlightenment, or kind of making the subject matter a little bit more accessible, then I've definitely done my job. But in terms of kind of the best reaction, I think it was because I actually found it so hard to find anybody to speak from an anti-nuclear point of view in terms of the panels and when we were screening the show. And I think that was kind of partly because it can be, you need to be quite brave in order to speak in public about this subject matter, because you're in fear of saying the wrong thing or getting something slightly wrong and then being kind of pinned with that. And that's why that person wrong, because it's so quite contentious. But we had this really wonderful professor here in Ireland speaking, who was very anti-nuclear and was very kind about the film, but didn't agree with the topic. But afterwards, her daughter, who's like 16, was talking about her little sister, who was 11. The two of them watched the film and watched their mom speaking afterwards. And the 16-year-old girl told me that her little sister had said that this was the first time that she understood that there was a solution to some of the world's problems. And it kind of dawned on me that these teenagers and these kids have been told that there's absolutely no solution to the world's problems and that we are kind of doomed. And that, you know, whether that be with climate collapse or with CO2 emissions or with respiratory diseases or with whatnot, we're absolutely screwed. And it was both simultaneously very sad, but also uplifting to hear that maybe, you know, even if a few people or a few kids see this film and kind of feel a bit hopeful about it, about maybe being able to kind of to tackle some of the bigger issues. You know, whether that be nuclear or solar or whatever, it doesn't matter to me as long as it gets solved. Then, you know, I'll feel happy about that.
Great. I think, you know, thinking about the next generation and thinking about, you know, having a solutions oriented, you know, point of view is so critical to, you know, hopefully have a more positive outlook on our future. So really, really appreciate that. Well, I know we're just up on time, but I really want to thank you, you know, for joining us today and for your amazing storytelling. You know, looking forward to your next project. I think, you know, there's probably going to be some other really great pieces and works that you put out, and so looking to celebrate those as well. You know, I'm just personally excited to see how you'll continue to impact the future of nuclear energy, climate change, and social impact entertainment, because I think that's so critical. The storytelling piece is really important for this work going forward. So yeah, really, really thank you. And you know, I think we're going to jump in now to a conversation with some really great experts and advocates across obviously the spectrum. But really, just thank you again, and hopefully, you know, we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thanks so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.
So for anyone else who wants to check out Frankie Fenton and his incredible work, you can go to atomichope.ie. That's www.atomichope.ie. It should be in the chat. And really just thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of the event.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Morgan Brumman, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the American Conservation Coalition, which was founded to mobilize young people around environmental action through common sense and pro-innovation principles. I'm so excited to be here today for a conversation around storytelling, nuclear energy, and climate change, inspired by the new documentary from Kennedy Films and filmmaker Frankie Fenton, Atomic Hope. Atomic Hope provides a decade-long exploration of a diverse group of pro-nuclear advocates from different parts of the world, including Japan, Switzerland, America, and Australia. These individuals share a unified belief in nuclear energy as a crucial solution for decarbonizing our energy systems. The film showcases their personal journeys, highlighting the scientific merit and environmental imperative of nuclear energy despite both public and political opposition. The film dives into the conflicting viewpoints surrounding nuclear energy, covering topics from fears over potential meltdowns and radiation to the financial and environmental costs of nuclear waste. The filmmakers do an excellent job in allowing viewers to form their own opinions based on the activists' firsthand experiences and arguments. Director Frankie Fenton shares his personal journey while making the film as well, acknowledging the contradictions in his own life between environmental ideals and practical choices. He emphasizes the larger picture, the global population's growing energy demands, and the urgent need to address major carbon-emitting sources. Fenton's reflections, combined with the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on science communication and public policy, highlight the complexities of environmental advocacy and the need for open, informed discussions on the future of energy solutions. I'm excited to kick things off with our panel for today. We're going to jump into an expert conversation with a great group that includes Paris Ortiz-Wines, who's the Global Director of Stand Up for Nuclear, Mark Nelson, who is the founder and managing director of Radiant Energy Group, Eric Meyer, founder and director of Generation Atomic, and Isaias Hernandez, educator and creator of Queer Brown Beat. So I'm going to kick things over to these panelists. I want to hear an introduction from you all. Can you share how you got into your work and how it intersects with nuclear energy, storytelling, and climate change. Whoever wants to kick things off, feel free.
Hey, everybody. I'm Mark, and I graduated with a nuclear engineering degree from a fancy university and thought that I had things all figured out. I like nuclear energy. All I had to do was go work at a nuclear plant or a nuclear energy startup, and things would be wonderful. The problem is, I graduated in the years following the Fukushima Daiichi triple meltdowns and the discovery of enormous amounts of cheap gas coming out of the United States shale formations, and during a time of crashing prices due to innovation and deployment of wind and solar. So I wasn't entering a nuclear that was growing. I was entering one that was dying. Nuclear phase outs were planned all over the world. And when you close nuclear plants, it means you don't need nuclear workers. So almost out of necessity, I found myself joining up with an environmental movement that was growing out in California and then around the world, where environmentalists were reevaluating nuclear energy and deciding to save it instead. So I was there as a technical helping hand, I suppose, to provide an engineering perspective on electricity, clean energy, and what we could do to save nuclear power plants. From there, I'd be open to consultancy that takes the experience we've had working around the world and seeing problems and opportunities in nuclear plants around the world, and Radiant Energy Group provides careful advice and guidance on how to run nuclear programs and how to keep nuclear plants open.
I guess I'll jump in. So hi everybody, my name is Paris Ortiz-Wines. I'm the global organizer of Stand Up for Nuclear. And so my interest in nuclear came from environmental sciences. So I learned about climate change in my city college class, and I then decided I needed to do whatever I could do as a single person to help battle climate change. And I found myself, went to the University of Santa Cruz, joined the environmental club, went vegan, and was just that much more motivated to find a career, a job in an environmental nonprofit. So I came to the Bay Area, and I found myself at the same nonprofit that Mark is referencing. And this one was focused on energy, something that I thought was too complex for me or something that would be too boring, but it was such a vital source and foundation of society that I was like, well, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to have the numbers guy help me out. And so I've learned the ins and outs about nuclear energy. And for me, coming from the environmental science background, I found it was a great disservice and to me that nobody talked about nuclear energy, because it seems that why wouldn't we want clean 24/7 power? And that was already our single largest source of clean energy in the United States, and the second largest source of clean energy for the world. I just found that if we were going to have a climate conversation, we weren't even laying the foundation of where we were at. So this initiative, Stand Up for Nuclear, was born through this nonprofit and then has fostered into something international in its own beast. And I'm just lucky to be a part of it and help kind of lead it, bring new people in. And the main idea is that we advocate for nuclear energy, we talk about it, and then we make sure that we don't lose anymore. And then we start to build where those countries and places do want it. So I'll head it over to, let's do it, Isaiah.
Yeah, that was so amazing, Paris and Mark. It's so great to meet you both. I think on my end, I am an environmental media creative. So actually my past experience is doing environmental science. So I went to Berkeley, did a lot of research, and was very much this individual that was like, I don't want to hear anything about nuclear. And I think that was very interesting in my classes when we talked about energy resource courses, and we didn't really cover much nuclear. It was very rooted on this like different energy sources, from like geothermal to like hydro to just other things. And I think for me, evolving into a digital media creative today, I've been doing this for the last 4 years full time. I really believe that like Gen Z receives most around climate education, which is like 25% of young people are learning about climate and are wanting to learn more. And I think it is a duty for us to really understand that the energy industry is not so much sometimes it needs to be more creative, needs to be more fun. And I've often realized that like a lot of the times when we're trying to communicate energy, it's very rigid, it's very focused on policy, which makes sense. It's very, it's sometimes very hard for creatives or for young people to understand like what that means. And so I think that like on my end, my duty as a creative and like a communicator is to really being honest of understanding how do we learn about science together? How do we really deconstruct topics, and how do we critically analyze and criticize energy systems or issues that we have in our world? And how do we really look for solutions through this lens of realistic ways of viewing societies through a holistic lens? So I'm very excited to be here. I'm more come from the environmental justice side, and it's really great to have been able to be part of this conversation. I'll pass it to Eric last.
Thanks, Isaiah. Yeah, I should probably keep this pretty short because a good chunk of this movie was about my life. So if you watched it, you probably already know a lot of it. But maybe a couple things that might not have been in the movie, I don't remember for sure. The first campaigns I worked on were to fight against a constitutional ban on a gay marriage in my home state, as well as a voter ID bill. Something I cared about a lot, especially because my dad is the first openly gay man in my hometown. So I don't know how that maybe that kind of reinforced the idea that if you work hard at something and build a movement, you can make real change. At that point in the history, this is like 2010-ish. A lot of states have been enacting these constitutional bans on gay marriage, and our state was in Minnesota was one of the first to fight back against that. So maybe it made me a little less politically jaded than people often are, and really made me believe that if we build a movement and we talk about it in the right way, tell the story in the right way, we can prevail and make the world a better place at the end of it. And so you heard a lot of my life story already, so I'll just leave it there, and happy folks could join us for this conversation.
I just wanted to note the variety of stories we just heard, where in my case, I wasn't trying to be an environmental campaigner. I didn't think of myself as somebody super interested in nature per se. And although I chose nuclear energy as a career specifically because it was clean energy, as in I had a family and where I come from, it's all about oil and gas when I was growing up. And then there was oil and gas and maybe a little bit of wind power. I chose nuclear energy as the only reason I went into energy in the first place. So I wanted to do something sustainable, and energy didn't feel open to me until I discovered nuclear energy. And then I thought I would have a technical career, behind the scenes in a company. And I only accidentally found my way to environmental campaigning when I found that the nuclear plants were being closed. And we heard 3 very different stories after that. And I just wanted to point that out to the audience. It's something that I think also comes through in the movie, which I've been lucky enough to see twice. I'm hovering at the edge of the movie. I'm not quite in it. And it was really great to revisit Eric's journey and other people I considered friends and mentors in the movie.
Absolutely. Well, we have our questions up now, so might as well take the moderator hat here. Paris, could you share a success story from Stand Up for Nuclear where storytelling significantly altered public perception? It's a good question. Take it away.
Yeah. So in general, right, like nuclear energy has a huge public perception issue. It's been something that we've been plagued with. So I'd like to share, I want to go about the California campaign. So it's something near and dear to my heart because I am based in California. So with California, we have a last nuclear plant, Diablo Canyon. Eric and Mothers for Nuclear and a couple other advocates started that battle to save the plant in 2016. And then the fight was reinvigorated in 2020. And so with this, humans connect through storytelling. And, one of the big ways that I connect with people and talk about nuclear energy is how I got into it, right? Because my environmental science background, I'll say ethnic, family, and just different stories of ways to connect with people. So with the California campaign, Diablo Canyon, California is viewed as this climate leader, right? And nobody really knew we had nuclear energy. But in 2020, because of a multitude of factors and timing just kind of came together, right? Electricity shortages were coming. We had our first rolling blackouts in 19 years, and people started to look at energy and electricity again. And so our small group, although there was other factors that came into play of how we eventually led to the 5-year extension for Diablo Canyon, we were there during the right time. And so us having a small group talking about nuclear energy, telling a different story than what people know, talking with legislators, talking with people on the street, that in itself starts to change the conversation, and it allows people that are behind the scenes, maybe like leaning to be in favor of nuclear, maybe are neutral, just needed more information, hadn't seen it in like the public arena where we have these conversations. And so when the time came where we teamed up with Mothers for Nuclear and then Isodope, Isabel Bomaki, we were the three main ones that were kind of leading the campaign in California. And we started to say we're climate activists and we like nuclear. And so when the time came to save Diablo Canyon and we needed a public forum, it wasn't the status quo anymore. We outnumbered those that opposed the nuclear plant. That was something different. So I can't say that we changed all of Californians' public perception on it, but us being there taking up space when it mattered most, that helps it. And now the conversation is like, okay, people want nuclear, so what is it going to look like in the state? So I think we helped start that conversation and are now helping foster it and bringing more people in because more people need to know.
Moving on over to Eric, how has Generation Atomic utilized unique advocacy methods to engage younger generations in the nuclear conversation?
Sure, yeah. I think our most enduring iconography that might appeal to younger generation are a couple things. One, we had this idea like, all right, we're just gonna steal the polar bear and make it a nuclear thing now. So like 2018, we started busting out the polar bear costumes at events and name this bear instead of Smokey the Bear. We got Melty the Bear here with holding a chunk of uranium and saying only uranium can prevent climate change. So that's been a fun one, and that idea really just occurred to me when in a public square in Estonia, I think, and there's just this massive line of families and young kids just to go give a person in a polar bear costume a hug and take a picture with them. And I was just like, man, people love polar bears. We can go ahead and steal this great idea. And then maybe the other one is putting stickers on bananas. That's something you saw in the movie and is still a tradition every year at COP this year to try to demystify radiation a little bit by letting people know, hey, you got potassium 40, naturally occurring radiation as part of your diet, and it's not hurting you. It's not causing cancer. It's part of nature. So a couple things that come to mind. Lately we've been talking to a lot of science teachers and working with them to get this card game called Megawatt that teaches about the whole electricity grid, the things that challenge it, and the importance of transitioning to that clean energy future. So a few of the ways that we've been working on over the years.
I definitely liked the polar bears in the movie. Moving on to Isaiah, from your perspective as queer brown vegan, how can the narrative around nuclear energy be made more inclusive and more diverse?
Yeah, I think relating back to the documentary that was just shown, the trailer, after watching it myself, I think it's something that is, very valid. And I think I know many of the women here can also agree to that. It's very a male-dominated industry. And I think that there is sometimes, and this can also maybe be said true for people who are very pro-solar all the way, is that there's this romanticization of nuclear energy. And I think that's a very dangerous at times narrative to have, even to on the other side, where it's like this is the only solution. And I use this example actually of a friend who does a lot of work in Berkeley, and he like called me like for 3 hours talking about nuclear and how amazing it is, and how, you know, like this like very like romanticized version of it. And I think that it was really great to see his passion. But I think that like when we're doing storytelling, right? Like even as a vegan myself, there's a lot of people who probably were like, I will never be vegan. And I'm like, you know what? I don't expect people to be vegan. Like I don't care what you want to do. I think that the main goal should always be like being true to those stories, right? Like being able to come from a more cultural lived experience of that relationship, while also validating the messiness that exists within nuclear energy. Because I think that when we're trying to tell better stories, you're trying to undo a narrative that has been prolonged, upheld in a very violent lens, or what I would say a degrading lens for a lot of different communities. And I think that, like, for me, I try to validate different communities' pains of where they're trying to come from. So in order for us to kind of become more diverse in those narratives, is that I do think that when you look at the dominant nuclear movement, I don't think it's I mean, I think it's the same issue with the dominant environmental movement. Like whether people agree with nuclear or not, like a lot of the environmental movement is predominantly composed by a lot of white individuals. So then how do we really bring different narratives together from different people, from different areas, from urban to rural areas? I think that goes down to understanding how do you community build. And, you know, I told my friend this is that, like, you know, they're like, how do I get more, you know, people like you to come or to talk about this, or to at least open a discussion to learn about the science? And I said, well, it's kind of the same way that you meet friends, right, of different races. You don't like approach them weirdly. You humanize them. And I think that's where we're really missing a lot of those elements today. And I don't know if that has to do based obviously too with political ideologies, but I do think that there is opportunity to showcase this narrative through education and interrogation. And that's how I've really approached my theory of change of work, is that I don't expect anyone to be vegan. I don't expect you to care, like, understand climate justice. I don't expect you to understand these things, but what I do expect you to have is respect. And I also need to understand that, like, finding common ground with narratives like that is very unique on that end.
Thank you so much for that. Moving on to the last individual question for this round before we move into a question for everybody. Mark, how do you foresee the role of advanced nuclear technologies changing the global energy landscape?
Well, first I have to say that it was the advanced nuclear narrative that got many of us into nuclear in the first place. I hadn't really cared about existing nuclear plants. I didn't have one near me, didn't have one in my state. It hadn't really come across my plate. And then I saw a video on the internet from a wonderful nuclear advocate up in Canada, up in Western Canada, who had made sure that his local TEDx event had a speaker about advanced nuclear, and put up a presentation on YouTube that I came across saying, we've barely scratched the surface on nuclear energy technology. All the things that you've heard that are bad about nuclear, some is true, some isn't true, but the more important point is that new reactor designs can solve the waste issue, the meltdowns, and the cost issue. So I saw that, and boy, I fell down an internet wormhole into nuclear straight away. In time, I came to feel there was enormous value in existing nuclear too, and that existing nuclear had solved a lot of problems that we haven't yet got to it for the designs that are under development now. I think we're going to get some incredible rabbits popping out of hats with the variety of brilliant people around the world working on advanced nuclear. But in the film itself, you start to see, whether it's clear or not, you start to see this world where there's people who get lots of people excited about nuclear energy because of the promise of new technology. And then some of us end up finding our role stopping the closure of existing nuclear, which involves pitching the public, going to the public honestly and openly and saying, let me tell you what's so wonderful about the nuclear plants that are already in your backyard, that are already in your nation. What this means is that the nuclear movement had to grow into loving all nuclear in order to stop shutdowns and closures. And that's given, I think, a lot of space, a lot of room to add advanced nuclear technology in the future. There's sometimes a little bit of a split between people who want the advanced nuclear reactors and build their identities and their companies around it, and people who are involved with the existing nuclear or trying to save existing nuclear from being closed. But I would say that the revolution the advanced nuclear has already given us, even before many of these technologies get developed, is that it's been a people revolution. They've given us a revolution in who's involved in nuclear, who's interested in nuclear, who feels they have a place at the table to talk about it and to journey along with the development programs and to also fight to stop shutdowns. So that revolution is assured. If no advanced nuclear reactor ever came to market or ever made a kilowatt hour of energy, that revolution would have already been provided. Now, I happen to think that in terms of the world revolution in advanced nuclear, I think that we are going to keep building existing nuclear. It's going to keep operating incredibly well. And we're going to find that almost any energy problem we have has a solution that could be addressed by an excellent development of an advanced nuclear system. Hard to abate sectors of the energy problem, for example, high temperatures used in making chemicals and substances that we use every day and that help protect nature by lowering our environmental burden if we can make them cleanly without emissions. Those are things that I'm very excited to see how we can address with new advanced reactors. I'm also interested in reactors that are able to address concerns people have about nuclear waste. I don't think that all of those concerns have to be addressed by successful development of advanced nuclear, but I think some of them can be, and it will be exciting to watch the science and the engineering develop.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to move back to a question for all of our panelists. And so anybody can kick off, and then perhaps we can popcorn in case anyone wants to just jump in. This question's for everybody. Can you each share a turning point or story from your advocacy work that you believe could change someone's mind about nuclear energy?
I'll start. I think for me, when I learned about nuclear, my biggest thing was like, what is this byproduct? What is this waste that we're talking about? What is this spent fuel? And I think a turning point for me was me going to a nuclear plant, and not everybody can do that, right? I'm not suggesting that, but when I went, I specifically asked to see where they were held in the cans, because that was one of my big things. I was like, why are we leaving this for generations? What does it look like? I had no idea. And so I got to see it, and I went, and there's other things about a nuclear plant that I think we can improve, like the security wise of it's just very daunting to enter in a facility like that. But when I saw the cans there, I was like, okay, so they're fuel rods. So I took a picture next to it, and Mark and I went around and hugged it. And I think when I talk about nuclear and people talk about the waste, because it is one of the, one of the three main concerns that people have, I get to show them this picture, and then I got to visit a national repository in the Netherlands, and I get to show them what it looks like, how they do tours, how they manage it. And through effective, open science communication about what that byproduct is and what regulations are put in place, and then honestly just what it is. People sometimes think it's a liquid. Some people think maybe it's green and glowing if you watch The Simpsons. So for me, the breakthrough is having these images and videos to show people and be like, I was there, because me too, that was something that I was concerned about. So I think it's a fun way to kind of break up the conversation of, making sure you're not talking at them, but having a good dialogue with a person, because that's what humans do, and that's what we should be doing when communicating.
I could go next. Yeah, so we in our work we do a lot of outreach, and sometimes that's sitting behind a table at, I don't know, the Minnesota State Fair, and you're talking to 1,000 people in a day about nuclear. And one of the things I love to do is bring a Geiger counter and a piece of this vintage Fiestaware that's actually somewhat radioactive, as back in the day they used to use uranium oxide as to get that color in the glaze, that nice bright orange color. And I say, okay, all right, here's a radiation detector, put it on the plate, and they do, and it starts clicking like crazy and beeping and flashing high, like we're all going to die. And that initial shock value is then juxtaposed against the story I tell about when I got the opportunity to tour the Waterford nuclear plant in just west of New Orleans. And I got actually an opportunity to get up close and personal with the nuclear waste, which, like a lot of people, I used to think was a liquid that was stored in leaky oil drums. And it's this solid thing. And of course, on that tour, I brought the very same Geiger counter that the person is testing the plate with, and tried to find the most radioactive part that I could, reaching up and down. And I finally found it. It was this air intake vent that I could reach on the bottom. And it was clicking a bit. The number on the Geiger counter said 15 microsieverts per hour. That plate that's sitting right in front of me, in between the person and I on this table, the reading on that plate is 20. So I have a plate that is more radioactive than nuclear waste. It's just a nice way to illustrate that the scary things can be less radioactive than the mundane, and we're not always the best at perceiving risk. So on top of that, love talking about energy density and just the incredible amount of power that's packed in such a small package. One pellet, a ton of coal, your lifetime of fuel inside of a can, with about the same waste at the end of it. These are amazing concrete examples that really illustrate how magical this technology really is. It's the power of the stars contained in this incredibly powerful rock we have called uranium. So that, in my experience, the more concrete you can make things, more easily visualized, the more compelling and persuasive. And I guess I'll popcorn over to Isaias.
Yeah, I think that I always share this for just honesty. Is I was always since in 2020, 2021, I was very against nuclear, and I think there was an event I got invited to. Is from the DOE, from Secretary Jennifer Granholm's Clean Energy Conference, and I got to meet the Ukrainian Prime Energy Minister, which is really insane, because honestly, I don't know why I was invited to that event when I don't really, again, I'm not within the energy sector, but I thought it was a really way for me to understand. And I felt like a lot of my assumptions I had around nuclear, I was it's dangerous and evil. And then when I heard Ukrainian's Prime Energy Minister say, this is the percentages of our energy systems from geothermal, I think large percent solar, then they have nuclear. And they're we really do try to provide clean energy, but our energy infrastructure is being bombed, or it's threatened by Russia. And I think that really made me kind of reframe a lot of my mentality globally, how I think about nuclear, because when I talk about nuclear, I only just talk about US, because I recognize now, in different countries, there are different protocols, there's different laws, there's different ways that people see nuclear. And I have to be very understanding that I don't come from those landscapes. Therefore, what right do I really have to be oh yeah, you're in a war right now, or in a conflict, you shouldn't use nuclear. That's not really my concern, right? It's to be the citizens of Ukraine and their safety and energy security. So I think on my end, how I really that really got me to really think about seeing the continued validation for the existence of nuclear plants myself was really good to understand so this is why I would be supporting this, because it's a union job. Majority of the people working it are women, gender diversity in these industries, this all really matters to me. I think when it came to the advancements of developments of nuclear, I share this honestly, is that I don't support it. I don't support it not because it's I don't trust them. I think it's more about understanding I still need to do more research on policy. I need to understand disaster relief management. I also need to understand the geopolitical context happening here in the United States, where a large source of our energy sources have domestic terrorism. I think that like it was reported, I think in America itself, like since 2022 there's been more than 100 reported incidents of like power plants, not just nuclear, I'm just saying like power plants themselves of electric grid. So like I think there is that just genuine concern I have with the advancements of developments, but I'm not someone that will go towards someone that's trying to push for that and try to cancel them. I'm more invested in understanding like, okay, so like looking at these existing nuclear industries in the United States, like what are ways that we can help strengthen those policies and make sure that people are treated right, and also to further educate those communities, because I do think that like the United States actions around trying to get more energy justice or infrastructure right now doesn't make sense with like, I don't want monocultural solar farms nor monocultural wind farms. So like I think there's an understanding now like of me saying like if we shut down this nuclear power plant, more fossil fuels will be built there. And that to me is like really against my ethos of just trying to understand like, so I sacrificed one energy source that could have lasted more decades versus trying to get rid of it. And then now 10 fossil fuel plants are there and they're not going to get rid of, because we know that industry has large confluence of power in politics and corporations. So I think that to me really did shift my mindset. I think it is very unique to talk about it in environmental spaces still. And I really had tried to be more open and transparent on that end of like my beliefs now where they're at as I've gotten older in this space.
My turning point is actually related to Isaiah's, and I was always fine with nuclear energy, I guess, if anyone had asked me, but no one did. I discovered it and was convinced I wanted to go into it. I got a degree in it. I was ready to start working, ended up in environmental activism because I was trying to save nuclear plants. And so I never had a conversion point really where I had to change my mind on nuclear. But I did have an important moment with the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which is that I was online and I didn't have a particularly big presence on Twitter. I mean, I had a few thousand followers, but I mainly made jokes about energy policy. There wasn't a lot that I was doing there. And then suddenly the front lines of a shooting war included the largest nuclear plant in Europe. And normally, when there's a nuclear problem out in the world, news channels know they have a Rolodex of people that they can call with zero qualifications to talk about it, but who are willing to say scary things and scare the audience with any kind of nonsense about the nuclear plant's going to have a meltdown and your family's going to be hurt and it's going to destroy the environment. All these things where you don't need to know what's happening. You don't need to know what's going on in the power plant. You don't need to know what's inside a power plant like that. And you don't need to know any of the health physics. You don't need to know any of the complications that would be required if you were trying to be accurate and careful in informing the public about a potential nuclear accident or an actual nuclear accident. So we had a situation unfolding where tanks were rolling up to a nuclear plant. Rocket launchers were being fired. Shots were ringing out. And behind, in these grainy video feeds from the internet, people around the world were watching buildings burning at what was clearly labeled the largest nuclear plant in Europe. And suddenly my inboxes were filling up. Hey, we're having a discussion about this. I know that you have a nuclear engineering degree. Can you come talk about this? People are panicking. Okay, so I get dragged into these Twitter spaces where I'm not saying I was an expert, not like the IAEA, certainly. And I wasn't there at the plant. All I could see is the same images other people were seeing. But I had a Russian degree and I had a nuclear engineering degree, and there was a conflict. There was a crisis, and I was the best we could get at the moment who didn't have a boss. I run my own consultancy and was able to put my reputation, which essentially was just a LinkedIn profile. I was able to put my reputation on the line, talking to reporters and news channels around the world that very night as the flames were still going at buildings at the nuclear plant. What was the worst case scenario given the information we had, and what was likely to be the scenario if things got worse or if things got better, and then what was the optimistic scenario? What's going on at the plant? Was it like Chernobyl? Could it be like Chernobyl? Same country as Chernobyl, right, Isaiah? It's Ukraine. They've had some of the worst nuclear energy trauma in the history of the world. Why were they operating this plant that was at the front lines of a war and could get captured? And the answer was, it's most of their electricity. Nuclear energy is most of their power, and it became higher importance, not lower importance, as they had to deal with external threats. And I was there at the moment where I realized, oh no, I'm on the news. People are having to trust me, and I'm having to get it right. Or if I get it wrong, I'm having to correct myself extremely rapidly. And I realized this was the transition. I was suddenly in a position of public trust and responsibility, which in a way, all of the people in the nuclear industry are in a position of public trust and responsibility, even if they've been hiding from the public behind walls, behind media managers, behind HR, behind legal officers for decades. At that moment, I felt how scary it really is to have responsibility for something and to be trusted by the public and to need to communicate openly and immediately, and from both the heart and the brain, shall we say. That was my big transition. And I guess I've spent several years trying to explain to the industry their obligation to feel that panic, to feel that intensity of taking their arguments and taking their case directly to the public, because there's no other way to do it. Letting other people tell your story is very dangerous in an industry with such a painful popular history. And if we're going to see nuclear play the role it ought to in providing prosperity without emissions, then the industry has to learn to go through these scary moments where you have to trust that the public will hear you speaking, will feel your earnestness, and will have to make up their minds whether to trust you.
Thanks, everyone. You all have just really diverse and unique experiences. I think it's great for this audience to hear. I'm going to move back into a series of questions, individual questions. So, Paris, I'm going to start with you. What strategies have you found to be most effective in overcoming nuclear energy stigma in varied cultural contexts?
Yeah, so I think it's similar to what Isaiah was saying of how when you go into a space, I'm an American, and so this global initiative, we have advocates in each different country. We're not going in and telling them you need nuclear. It's these advocates reaching out saying, we want to talk about nuclear, we want to save a nuclear plant, we want to remove a moratorium. There's some action or some interest. And so basically we come from it from like an anthro background where like, let's observe what's the geopolitical space, right? Like how was nuclear built? What is the public perception? Looking at the recent polling data and seeing where people are at. We're going to meet them at the foundation of, do we like nuclear because it's good for the climate? Do we like it because of energy security? What motivates these people? And what are people's values, and what do they want to see for their nation? So the strategy is always having your local group there. They are the leaders and we're there to assist. And then also knowing your audience, who are we trying to reach out to? We're not going to be trying to, there's a spectrum of there's anti and then super pro, right? And within that, we have various advocates. And I think, of any strong movement, whether we need the more voices we have, the more diverse voices we have, the better. And I found as a woman in this space, there's many women that feel that maybe they don't have all the information and therefore can't take an opinion. So one of the things that I really try to do is, specifically when we go into new spaces, is make sure that the newcomers or even the women get to have a say and to express their opinion, because it's so vital. Because if I went to a tabling event and it was all boys and it was all engineers, I'm not going to give you the time of day, and I probably will just scoff and walk away. So I think it's really those three things where really highlight the people you have in your movement and give them the resources and help them become the voices, know your audience, and then study just the audience in general within the nation of why is nuclear tainted? Why is it really good? Just understanding it. And so every campaign, every action looks completely different within every nation. And then even if it's urban or rural.
Thanks, Paris. Eric, kicking things over to you. In your campaigns, what has been the most unexpected yet effective way of communicating the benefits of nuclear energy?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's unexpected or not, but it might feel counterintuitive. But actually asking questions and getting folks to engage with you, asking what their perspective is. If we have the instinct to, if somebody raises an objection to nuclear, give them go right into a bulleted list of why the thing they're worried about is not true or invalid in some way. And I think that comes from there's a lot of engineers in this space, and the facts are very important to those types of folks. But as I think it was Teddy Roosevelt said something to the effect of, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And you really need to listen to people and make them know that they are heard before you can change anybody's mind about nuclear, or maybe help them form an opinion in the first place. And we've been trying to train that up into our Atomic Ambassadors group. So we have this group of global volunteers who are interested in advocating for nuclear, but want to get better at it. And that's one of the key things we communicate. And you saw in the movie, the pro-nuclear movement is not gigantic, and it's bigger now than it was when the film came out originally, or was filmed. But we really need to scale up, and also it's not all about the message. It is the messenger, and having people speak to their communities is so helpful as a part of that. So as a result of that work, we've seen like just in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm thinking of a couple volunteers that have spoken to literally over 1,000 students, high school students, about nuclear energy as a result of this training program and some of the support we could provide. And that's such a critical age when kids are figuring out what to do, and we need so many people to enter into the workforce to make the clean energy transition. Nuclear or other clean energy technologies. It's just so important to get people thinking about that as a career choice, whether it's a skilled trade or engineering. And I think there's a ton of power in that, giving people the right tools to be successful in their conversations, and then giving them permission and encouraging them and giving them ideas on how to go out there and actualize that. So maybe it's not unexpected, but it's also not obvious. But that's what's been effective for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Mark, kicking things over to you. What innovative approaches have the Radiant Energy Group employed to demystify nuclear energy for the broader public?
So we're a consulting group, and we visit clients in the nuclear sector. I'd say the big thing I do there is that I make sure that if I visit a nuclear plant, I don't walk away until I have some sick pictures. And this is important because if I'm trying to make a point alongside our work to a nuclear power plant owner, or say the professional communication staff at a nuclear power plant, that they can go to the public, take their case to the public, and be loved for it, they won't believe me the same way if I just say it versus if I get a photo as close as I can to their reactors, to their waste, to the nuclear plant itself, and then get it to go viral on Twitter. And by the way, getting a nuclear power plant photo with a person in it to go viral is easier than you might imagine, because there's almost no good images of people just vibing at a nuclear power plant. So I'm there for a visit. I ask if I can get a photo. I'm typically turned down. I have to get a photo from outside the plant. I post it. And then what we see, just the most recent visit was in ASCO nuclear plant in Spain. And we were not allowed to take photos. And when they released photos, they released nothing of any particular photographic merit. So instead, I put out a photo of me standing on a pile of broken up concrete about half a mile from the plant, overlooking a railroad and a river, with the big cooling tower in the background and me striking kind of an Indiana Jones sort of pose. And it got 1 million views on Twitter. Why? Because nobody had gotten to see somebody have fun with photos at a nuclear plant. And that demystifies. Once people decide they're kind of curious about nuclear, they'll go learn whatever facts they can find. Some of them will be false. There are false pro-nuclear facts. There are false anti-nuclear facts. And there's true facts in both of those categories. And people will go find what they want once the mystery is maybe not gone. So I wouldn't say demystified, but once the nuclear plants have the possibility of excitement. So let's say enchantment. So I take it from not demystified, but bring it from mysterious, scary to enchanted, interesting. And I do that by just getting photos when I'm on work trips.
Awesome. Isaias, moving on to you. How do you bridge environmental justice with the promotion of nuclear energy in communities that may be historically skeptical, about this energy source?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that with the environmental justice movement that is comprised a lot from marginalized groups, from Black, Indigenous people of color, is that I think that there is different research that has been presented of energy usage or energy technology being built that has, first of all, violated Indigenous rights of their lands being used without permission. So I think from a governmental level, I think in the past, like this is decades ago, I don't know how it is now, there were violations, and I don't know if the U.S. government admitted to that. But to the modern environmental justice movement, one of the principles in that movement is that they are anti-nuclear. And I think that, like, with elders and other people I've talked to, that some of them in energy justice lawyers, they're not for nuclear. And I think that, like, it's really, I would love to have a discussion where we can actually bring from lawyers to marginalized communities that have experienced, or their generational families that had experienced something that was not done properly or ethically, and to come together and to talk about the research and data. Because I think that, like, it's interesting to see, like, there's research studies that show that, like, some communities were hurt, but then in order to prove an environmental injustice, like through the law, through the EPA, there needs to be certain markers of measurement to be able to prove that. And I think that's very hard for communities to one case to prove, because, like, the data collection does take time. But two, it's also like a lot of these communities don't have the resources to, like, support. But I do think that, like, if we were trying to maybe bridge the conversation to have more deeper, is that, like, I am so pro, like, roundtables to have this discussion, because I think there's things that I need to learn myself, and there's things that, like, I think one of the reasons why a lot of EJ groups are distrustful is that, from my understanding, some of them are distrustful because it's not that they don't trust the technology, they don't trust the government upholding to its promises, even though there's a lot of people within those industries that are like, we can do this, policies will make sure this is safety, this, all of these things. But I think that distrust from the local government has come from the lack of acknowledgement, or continued to do so, and also hopefully some pathway to not offset the pain, because I don't ever want to, discount any marginalized communities' experience, and I don't live in those areas, but to understand, like, what are ways that not we can go over it, but to create equity and justice for you in an equitable way, while understanding, like, the needs for the energy infrastructure in the United States. And I do think it's really hard. I mean, I've tried myself to, like, include nuclear, like, conversations on my YouTube videos now, like COP28. So, like, that was really interesting to just be like, I'm just going to show my followers what they think about nuclear. And if I get canceled for it, like, it's fine. At least I just try to have an open discussion with people. I did not come there to attack the nuclear people. I just said, like, what is nuclear? Like, what does this, like, the banana example, I was always confused by. I was like, what does this mean? Like, I'm so confused. And, just as from a scientific experience, it's good to just teach people the science.
What an important topic to end on. Thank you so much.